In this lesson, we'll learn how to create primitives inside of 3ds Max. So up to this point, we've learned a lot about the interface. We've learned how to navigate inside of 3ds Max. And we've also learned how to select objects. So now we're ready to go ahead and learn how to create objects inside of 3ds Max. So what I want to do is I want to go to my Create panel. I want to be under Geometry and Standard Primitives. And before we begin, I want to explain that there is an actual creation process that 3ds Max uses whenever creating primitives. And it's really a 1, 2, or 3-click process whenever creating primitives. So let me explain what that means. Let's go to a sphere, and let's click and drag this sphere. So if we click and drag with our left mouse button, this will create a sphere. And as we're dragging, we're adjusting the radius of this sphere. So we'll release that, and the sphere has been created. This is a one-click process with this type of primitive. Okay? So let's go ahead and right-click one time because we want to end the primitive creation process. You'll notice that sphere is still highlighted, and if we click and drag or try to select an object, you'll notice that it creates another sphere. So we want to right-click to end that. So let's go ahead and hit delete one time. Now we've created this sphere in our scene. So let's discuss what a 2-click process creation is. So a box takes 2 clicks to create. So let's go ahead and click and drag just like we did with the sphere. And you'll notice that we're getting the base width of this box. Now once we release that and we move our mouse button, it's trying to adjust the height of this box. So we'll click again to end the creation, and that will give us our height that we adjusted. So a box is a 2-click process. So now let's right-click to end that box creation, and let's discuss what a 3-click process primitive is. So let's go to cone, and just like we did with our box and sphere, we'll click and drag, and this will give us the base of our cone. And then we'll release that, and this will allow us to adjust our height just like our box. So we'll click one more time, and now if we move our mouse, you'll notice that it's adjusting the point of this cone. So once we get the desired point, let's say we want to go all the way down to where it's a very pointy end, we'll go ahead and click one more time to end that process. So a cone takes 3 clicks to create. Now, you could go through all of these standard primitives, and I would encourage you to experiment to create these different primitives. So let's go to a cylinder. And a cylinder is very much like a box. Let me go to my top view and create this, because what I want to show you is whenever we're creating objects in 3D space, we can also create them in the front, top, or left, but it does work just a little bit differently. So let's create this just below our box. So we'll click and drag to get our base for our cylinder. We can see that being created in our perspective. And let's drag our height, but you'll notice in our top view that it doesn't look like anything's happening. That's because we're viewing it right at the top. But you'll notice in our perspective that we can see the height being drawn. So we'll click again to finalize that height. So a cylinder is a 2-click process, and we've also talked about how we can actually create it in a different viewport, some things to actually watch out for. So let's take a look at a different one. We have a geosphere, and this is very much like a sphere itself. So we click and drag, and that will give us our radius. And you can see in your wireframe how that one's different. So let's right-click to end that creation process, and let's try a tube. Now a tube is a 3-click process. We will click and drag our outer radius, and then we'll release that and drag our inner radius So we'll click again to finalize that. And then we'll drag one more time to get our height. And we'll click to end that. So that is a 3-click process geometry. So we'll go to pyramid. And a pyramid is actually a 2-click process. We'll click and drag the base, and then we'll get our height. We'll right-click to end that. We have a torus, which is a 2-click process. We'll click and drag our outer radius. We'll release that and get our inner radius. And click that, and that will finalize a torus. It's kind of like a donut, if you want to think of it that way. And let's go to a teapot. Now I know a teapot seems kind of odd to be in standard primitives, but this is kind of an inside joke with 3ds Max. So we'll create this teapot, and it's always been inside of 3ds Max, so we're just not going to take it out. And we're going to go to plane, and this is a 1-click process. This is just basically clicking and dragging a base of a box, except we don't get any height or depth with it. And then we have, well, I think we've actually gone through all of these here. So just kind of experiment with the standard primitives. So we have a teapot, a sphere, geosphere, and a plane. Those are all 1-click pieces of geometry. We have a box, a cylinder, a pyramid, and a torus, which is a 2-click piece of geometry. And then we have a tube and a cone, which takes 3 clicks to create. Okay, so take some time and practice that, and you should be getting really familiar with how to create primitives pretty quickly. Now you could go ahead and move on over to extended primitives if you like, but I'm not going to discuss those, seeing how the creation process is exactly the same as standard primitives. So in the next lesson, what we're going to talk about is how to actually move, rotate, and scale our geometry that we've created in our scene.